Special thanks to these companies for being long-term partners of this channel.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Zach. Here we talk about overlanding, gear, builds, DIY, all sorts of stuff related to modifying your vehicle or just getting out there and adventuring in your vehicle. And so today what I want to talk about is the SPC control arms I have on my truck. So we kind of went through this long Dobinsons suspension install. I'm absolutely loving the install, but all of a sudden I realized that a lot of people just buy SPC upper control arms to use with more basic lift, or maybe they even use them on a spacer lift, who knows. But if you were just kind of curious how they work, I want to talk a little bit about that. So I'm going to kind of do a little bit of an unboxing and show how these stack up next to your stock control arms. And just kind of explain a little more too about all of the different alignment terms, because those can sometimes be a bit confusing. So if you like what I'm doing with the channel, if you like these sort of explained videos, or if you just enjoy what I'm doing and you want to support me, consider subscribing to the channel and like this video if it brings you any sort of value, because it helps me out and helps me be able to continue to grow the channel. So thanks for watching, and let's jump right into it. I want to just go through some of the jargon, because if you're not familiar with it, it can be kind of annoying and confusing. So what I like to start with is camber, because camber is what a lot of people just kind of throw around. When people say your vehicle is off camber, it probably means that you're tilting left or right, and that can feel a little spooky on the trails. So a lot of people talk about camber as far as just the vehicle, but that's the exact same thing with tires. So if we have a tire leaning in towards your truck, that's going to be called negative camber. And then if you have a tire leaning away from your truck, not in towards it, but the opposite direction, that's going to be positive camber. So that's all they really refer to. And obviously you want to have neutral camber here so that the bulk of your tire is touching the ground appropriately. So the next thing after camber is caster. And caster has to do with, basically they draw this vertical line where your shock would be directly over your axle. And if you slide your tire forward, meaning that it kind of tilts like this, that's called positive caster. And then if it leans backward, where your shock mount on the frame is forward and the part where it mounts to your lower control arm is backward, that is what we call negative caster. Now think about all of those carts that you've pushed around where they have a tire that's connected in one orientation that kind of wiggles around on the bottom of the cart. Obviously you can tell that if it's pointing backward like this in the negative caster position, that's kind of like the wheels on a cart. It's being pulled. So you have your mounting point on your cart and your wheel is behind it, and when you pull your cart, the wheel rolls really easily. So if you were to flip it around, it will typically allow your tire to not turn quite as much. And so that's typically why most vehicles these days have positive caster, because positive caster makes it a little bit harder to turn, but since you have a power steering system on your vehicle, typically you can do that. And it's much safer to have positive caster than to have negative caster. Negative caster makes it almost too easy to turn, and so you can have kind of sketchy problems with that. So a lot of cars, modern cars in general, just are designed to have a little bit of positive caster. What these upper control arms do is they give us even more caster, because there's a certain range where you can bump your caster up and it's not going to be unsafe, and then it will pull your wheel away from your body right here, which is where Toyotas rub in general. Now, the biggest thing that maybe could happen is if you move your tire so far forward that you have like 5 or 6 degrees of positive caster, you start to get so far away from this midline point where this is what would be called as understeering, where basically it's so hard to steer that you turn all the way, and it's so hard that your car still won't maximize its turning radius. And so that's kind of the upper threshold of adjusting your positive caster, and most people never set it that high, but that is kind of what will happen if you start to get to a really high point in your positive caster. Then the last one is toe, and this kind of makes sense, but I'll still explain it. So toe is when you look down on the top of your vehicle, if your tires are pointing inward, kind of like a pigeon toe, or if they're pointing outward, When they're pointing inward, this is considered positive toe, and when they're pointing outward, this is negative toe. So those are the three axes that they look at when they're doing an alignment on your vehicle. They make sure your tires aren't leaning outward like this. They make sure that they're forward to backward, set correctly, and then the toe, they make sure that's set properly so when you point forward, your wheels actually point forward. So people probably think that just the leaning out and the pointing in is the important axes, but also that positive and negative caster is really important for on-road dynamics. And in our specific situation, we want to get a little more positive caster out of the vehicle so that we can fit larger tires. So that's camber, caster, and toe. Next, we're going to jump into just kind of looking at your tire or looking straight at your rim. Just kind of want to talk about the typical things that are connected to your tire. So let's look at the rim. This is just kind of a side profile of your vehicle. So this is where your plastic would be. And then here's your wheel. If we look at this, we have a lower control arm, an upper control arm, your steering rod, and your CV axle. And this is kind of where they're located. This is more just for instruction or educational purposes. This isn't like a true model. But your shock is typically connected to your lower control arm. And then your upper control arm is connected to your spindle. And so the spindle is what connects to the top of your wheel. And the upper control arm connects to the spindle. And the upper control arms is mainly what we're talking about right now. So you can adjust your lower and upper control arms for your wheel, toe, caster, and camber. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about. But I just wanted to show that you can adjust your positive and negative caster down in your lower control arm, and you can also do it in your upper control arm. So that's just kind of what I wanted to explain, because before we talk about all the adjustability of your SPC upper control arms, I just kind of want to show that you can actually get more caster with your lower control arms as well. So now to just kind of jump a little bit into looking at what each of those things are. So here's our spindle connecting to our upper control arm. Here's our shock. Here's our lower control arm. Here's our steering rod. And here is our CV axle. So what I want to show is if you adjust your caster on your upper control arm, the reason that these SPC control arms are so cool is you can adjust your caster and you can adjust your camber, because if you sometimes adjust your caster to move the lower control arm forward, this isn't a perfect two-dimensional axis. It can't just slide forward and back. So if you slide, let's say, the lower control arm forward, it may pull the tire in a little bit, because maybe this mount right here is like a little bit in front of your spindle or a little bit behind. So depending upon how you set things, every time you change your camber, caster, or toe, you may need to adjust the other things in order to make sure your tire is perfectly set up. And so that's why the upper control arms are so nice, is you can dial in the amount of caster you want, and then you can adjust your lower control arm and upper control arm to basically finish picking the correct camber, because you can't just have, a ton of positive caster and completely ignore the camber. So that's how that works. Let's jump into unboxing the upper control arm, because I think this is going to make a lot more sense once we actually are looking at the upper control arms. So here's our box from SPC. I have basically cracked the seal on it, but I haven't really looked too much at the packaging. So let's go through what comes in the packaging, and then we'll go from there. So these are pretty huge upper control arms. I think they have a lot better clearance than your older style stock ones. So we've got two upper control arms, and then we've got these two huge joints right here where the spindle is going to connect. So I'm going to set this aside. So before we get into talking about the intricacies of this upper control arm, I do want to just show this upper control arm compared to the stock one. So let's lay this out here. I'm going to put my old upper control arm on the plastic because it's kind of greasy and gross. So here is our old upper control arm. Now the interesting things here is they're roughly the same size. So they don't necessarily change the profile. It looks like here they have a little bit better clearance as far as maybe if a shock body or something could rub on here, or Other things, it's just, it looks like they have a little bit better clearance for allowing you to run potentially larger suspension. So if we grab our drawing here, I just want to show that this is where I was saying you can adjust the camber, because if you think about it, if you've got this upper control arm just like this and it's connecting to your spindle, if you slide your spindle out, you know, that's going to probably pull in your tire, because you slide out the spindle, that pulls in the bottom, and so then that'll pull your tire towards your vehicle. And if you remember from earlier, pulling it towards your vehicle means that it's negative camber. And so if you adjust this in the slider, that's how you can adjust positive and negative camber on the upper control arm. And then to kind of explain how we adjust the caster, they've got this nice little diagram for us. So depending upon which side you're doing, so all you do is you place this star plate appropriately inside of the ball joint, and that allows you to get different amounts of caster. So if you need a negative caster or positive caster, this is basically how you do it. You just use this adjusted plate. And this is for the left side, this is for the right side, so it's really nice that they give you these orientations. So here's one of our ball joints. You're not gonna really do too much to the bottom here. This is the little spot where you'd hook up a greaser, because these need to be greased basically at every oil change. So all I'm going to show you though is just how you set this star plate. So they call it a star plate because I guess it's probably due to this like octagonal shaped cutout here. But so we have this huge nut, and that's going to be threaded through our big cutout here. And then this is our star plate. So see how that has like a shape on it? And then here is our little cutout. So when we put this plate in, it allows us to orient this ball joint in different ways. And that's what makes this so adjustable. And so then when you slide this through and you mount it into the upper control arm, then it'll stay in place. So here's where that rectangular plate is going to fit into, and so obviously with the confines of this cutout in the upper control arm, this isn't going to really slide around too much. It'll slide in that little tray to adjust the camber, but you're not going to have huge problems with it sliding all over the place. So let's just pretend that this is going to be our left side upper control arm. How you figure out whether they're left or right is basically where this cutout is. So in our specific case, we've got a circular cutout on the top and the rectangular on the bottom. So we know that this upper control arm is our left side because we need to have the rectangular plate on the bottom. So then if we look at our star plate here, so to maximize our caster, you can see on this paper here, we need to orient our plate like this. So in configuration A here, this is how the plate is set up. All right, so I just grabbed the ball joint and we've put it on the actual upper control arm. So what I want to do is kind of further clarify this diagram here. So when we look at the diagram, it's really important to look at this vehicle. So see right here, this one is highlighting the front left upper control arm. And that is what we're operating on right here. So if we wanted to orient this drawing correctly, this is how the drawing would look as far as the upper control arm is going to be facing. So right now, how I have it oriented with the circular part pointing forward, that means that we are configured like setting G right here, which is negative caster. So if we want to have positive caster, like I really was initially talking about, we need to loosen this up and we need to set the plate so that this round portion is pointing backward. So there we go. So we have it pointing backward now. I'm going to tighten down this nut. And there we go. So now this is the front left. We're looking at the diagram. This is the front left tire. And we have our circular side of our ball joint facing backward. That is what we want on the left side. And that's how this is set up right here. So that's going to help us get more positive caster. So just to further clarify, because I think this is kind of confusing, I'm having a little bit of time kind of wrapping my mind around this, but I've oriented my vehicle appropriately on here, which means my upper control arm is pointing forward. And so in their instructional video, they set the location to E, and E means that the circular portion is pointing in this direction. You have a total positive caster of +1. Now what I'm doing is I'm changing it all the way to A. So if we look at here, that's going to rotate this circle to all the way towards the back. So that's what I have it set right here. Now this may be a little too much. I may have too much caster on the top, and this is going to need to be moved backward a little bit, but only time will tell and kind of getting an alignment to figure that out, but this is how I'm going to initially do it. So similarly on the right side, I'm orienting the plate to push backward just like we did on the left, and threading everything through to tighten this down. Now one thing that kind of scared me a little bit as I was watching a YouTube video from SPC's official YouTube page, and it talks about how to, you know, potentially cut some stuff to fit this spindle, but just remember to keep all of your specific part numbers in order and don't watch the incorrect tutorial videos, because if you're following my walkthrough and your upper control arms are designed differently, you may have to do something entirely different. So this is really more just for a forerunner application. Double check if there's other things you need to do. So after getting the front left and right knuckles here set up, maybe you call that a knuckle, maybe you don't, I just want to explain what these plates are for. So just to show how these plates work, what you want to do is, you can see how there's an indentation in this. So the indentation, as far as I can tell, is always going to be facing the upper control arm. So on the right side, we're going to have that little protrusion face on the exterior, and same with up front, it's going to face the top or the front, depending upon how you want to think about this orientation. This is going to face this bushing here. So SPC has a patented design for this connection, and so this bushing, if you use the original spacers or any sort of hardware other than the bolt, you might damage these because they're not designed to be a one-to-one substitution for the stock upper control arms. You need to also use these plates in order to put this into the mounting location of your upper control arm. So that's going to sum that up. If you want to actually see the install, go check out my front suspension install video. I will link it up in the top corner here. And with that being said, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next video.